Welcome to March, ladies and gentlemen. March 7th, 7 p.m. Eastern Time means it's time for the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show presented by the FFPC right here on the Better Sports Network. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. I'm Eric Balkman from the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. Follow me on the X at Eric Balkman. Pleased to welcome in my guest co-host for the next 119 minutes plus. He is Scott Connor from DestinationDevy.com at DestinationDevy on the X, and of course, DynastyTradesIn5.com at TradesIn5 on the X. Charles Chill, FFB, the man, the myth, the legend. Holy cow, Scott, I want to start having you promote yourself right off at the top of the show, because I think while everybody else in March 7th, 2024 is going about 30, 40 miles an hour, you are racing about 90, 100 miles an hour as far as fantasy football goes. And if anybody's looking for high-end content, you're producing a ton of it right now, man.
Yeah, Balky, thanks for having me on. And yeah, we are. This it feels like you get a reprieve when you get to the off season. Like everything has ended, lineup stuff happened to be set, and you feels like you can just take a little bit of a break. But then this was the first year I went to the Senior Bowl, which was awesome. And then ever since, it's just been combine, early best ball drafts, diving into the rookies, trying to come up with dynasty content to do. And then by the time we get to May, it's already like looking forward to rookie drafts being here, being over soon, and then getting into the season. So it really is like the NFL, my friend. It never stops. There is something to talk about, or news to talk about, or something to write or podcast or record a video about, literally 24/7, 365. So glad to be here.
And it's interesting too that this is the first year that you went to the Senior Bowl. Can you talk a little bit about, I mean, did it affect the way that you looked at players as far as dynasty and redraft at all? Seeing these rookies up close at all? Like, can you share a little bit about what sort of stood out to you about your experience at the Senior Bowl this year?
Well, it's funny, about 24 hours before I left for the Senior Bowl, I had a long phone conversation with our friend Farrell Elliott. I had to work out something with him regarding going to Kentucky literally 5 days after I got home from the Senior Bowl. But he gave me an idea of what to expect, because he's been to many Senior Bowls, and I went into it really just with an open mind. Like, I was going there with the Destination Devy crew. They've been there before. They're used to making content there. I was just there as a fly on the wall. But you get there and you realize just how interactive it is in terms of NFL people. The prospects are right there, and you really get like an appreciation for the sport. I mean, I'm not somebody, I played football, middle school, junior high, pee-wee, but nothing above that. I've always come to this from a game theory, from a fantasy baseball standpoint. I've always been into football for just the game aspect of it. But getting there up close, getting to meet the players, interview the players, get on the field, I left with a more of appreciation for the nuance of the game. And Balky, I'll say this, you get there and there are so many players that are good. And then the reminder is like the 30% of the best players aren't even there. Like the best players aren't even there. If you think Roman Wilson and Lad McConkey and Xavier Leggett are great, wait till you get to the top 8 receivers in the draft that don't even have to go there. So it's just it's an eye opener. Looking forward to going next year because I'll have a totally different perspective.
I think that's I'll tell you what. You've seen the show rundown. It's kind. Well, let's do it this way. Is there anybody that really stood out to you at the Senior Bowl that you're like, God, I'm glad I'm here because I'm glad I got to see this guy up close, because now I have a totally different view of him, good or bad, Scott? Was there anybody that's like the players that stood out to you, or like, if I wasn't here, I would not have this opinion of this player?
Yeah, there was a couple. I got to stand next to and interview probably half a dozen players. And one of them was Malachi Corley. And I'm a pretty built, compact guy. I'm not tall, but I'm okay. I have a little bit of a physique, but standing next to that dude, you see on paper, he's 5'11", 215. And then you get next to him and you have a true appreciation for what it would take when you see those guys in the NFL, the big slot receiver, right? Like, you don't have an appreciation watching him play just how physical a short, compact running back is. And imagine you seeing somebody, couple of the people that I went to, they had gone to the Senior Bowl a couple years before, and they just remember talking about Najee Harris and Brian Robinson being there. Just how massive they are.
Yeah.
You stand next to some of the other running backs, and you're like, okay, Cody Schrader, he's like my size. He's bigger than me. Literally, he's small. And you're like, this guy compared to Najee Harris or Brian Robinson. But Corley stood out. Like the definition of what it takes to be like an inside slot receiver in the NFL. Like I can definitely see why people comp him to Deebo Samuel, but you don't realize that's Deebo Samuel when you're watching him until you're up close. And you're like, yeah, that's what 5'11", 220 looks like. And it's like, there's no way I would want to mess with that player.
I think that's it's important to like understand too, like seeing a height and weight and all these measurables on paper or on the internet is one thing, but to actually stand next to him, like, oh my God, that's another thing. Totally.
No, one more. I got to stand next to Jaylen Guyton, the tackle, 6'7", like 340. And you see him up close and you're like, is that a tackle? I mean, it looks literally like a small forward.
Right.
You'd think a tackle is just going to be massive and sloppy. And you're like, that looks like he doesn't look any different than the tight ends, except for he's 75 pounds bigger. Right. So just being next to a guy like that, you're like, okay, that's what it takes to like get after the quarterback, Bulky. You got to get around that guy. Like there is no way. So very interesting.
Who was the kid? I shouldn't say kid. I know I'm much older than him, but he's like twice my size. He's a top 10 pick last year, defensive end. I want to say Texas Tech, and just was an actual freak. I think the Raiders took him, and I can't remember what his name is off the top of my head. Tyree Wilson. Thank you so much. That's why Scott Connor is the best in the business. I would imagine standing next to that guy. I know I'm safe. Like I physically can stand there. No, this guy's not going to attack me. But the muscle and the size of this guy, I would be like 1% of me would be like, I got to get away from this guy as soon as, because he was such a physical freak. And we see this in the NFL too, as well as on the skill position side, running backs, tight ends, receivers, what have you. We'll get into plenty of the rookies tonight with Scott. And actually, we're going to do 2 segments of where do you stand. Scott's going to tell us where he stands in the first segment coming up at the bottom of the hour. Quarterbacks and running backs. Then we'll do wide receivers and tight ends at the top of the hour. And then we're going to get into a bunch of dynasty team building exercises here. We're going to talk about the proper way to build a wide receiver room. We're going to talk about how you handle a lot of these free agent running backs that are hitting the market this year. And we're going to talk about whether there's a rookie draft teardrop already. That and much more tonight on the show. So let's lead things off with stuff in the news. Now, because Zach Ertz was on a practice squad at the end of the 2023 season in Detroit, he was free to sign with any team prior to the free agency starting. He ended up signing with the Washington Commanders, 1-year contract. Now, here's the thing. The contract's worth up to $5 million. I would assume that's a lot of incentives in there. 187s and a touchdown in 7 weeks last year. He hurt his quad, and then he landed on injured reserve. But in those 7 games, he did get 27 receptions. He's with Cliff Kingsbury, who kind of unlocked his greatness in Arizona. I'm kind of wondering here, Scott, when you look at Zach Ertz, there's not a lot of competition for tight ends in Washington. And I know there's not going to be a ton in free agency that Washington can attack. I know there's not going to be a ton in the draft unless they want to go for somebody like Brock Bowers or somebody like that. I'm kind of looking at Zach Ertz right now as an intriguing guy in the FFPC Never Too Early tournament as a tight end that might be sort of forgotten about, but somebody we shouldn't forget about, Scott.
No, it actually, between him and Jonnu Smith, both of them got cut prior to free agency, so they were eligible to sign somewhere before the new year starts. Shout out to Ray Garvin. Him and I are doing the best ball tournament drafts together, and we're on, I think, 29 right now, just registered for our 30th. But we are pretty much punting tight end in everyone and building 3 tight end builds and waiting until round 14 through 20 to take our tight ends. And it's kind of a nice reprieve because, Balky, when you're doing that many teams and you're taking that same philosophy, you're down to like, man, we've drafted Davis Allen in 7 leagues. We've drafted Hunter Henry in 6 leagues, and it's all the same guys. You wait until, 20 plus tight ends are off the board, and then you take your 3, and you're always just kind of taking the same 8 to 10 over and over. And I'm like, man, it's kind of nice. We now have, at least in the next, I don't know, 72 hours or so, we have 2 new names we can start taking in round 18 through 20, just taking some Zach Ertz and taking some Jonnu Smith. So I think that's where they go. I don't think they're anything more than that. But for a tournament like that, when you're building 3 tight ends and you're just searching for cheap points, I think it's 2 new names on our radar. So that's how I would classify them, but nothing better than that.
Yeah, I mean, like Ertz isn't even going in the never too early right now. And by the way, I'm getting that information via Fantasy Mojo, fantasymojo.com. Darren Armani, the godfather of the FFPC Pros versus Joe's competition, something Scott has participated in before, probably will continue to participate in. Jonnu Smith is a 20th round pick. Ertz not going. So these guys are free at this point. And it is nice to inject that kind of variance into your draft late on that, especially when you're punting tight end. Can you let me know or let the viewers know a little bit why punting tight end is a strategy for you in this never too early tournament?
Well, I mean, first of all, it worked last year. If you were able to take tight ends outside of round 10, there were plenty. I also have a theory with kind of the new way tight end scoring distribution is going to go. Maybe we can dive a little bit deeper into that. But basically, what we saw last year was the lowest scoring year for tight ends at the top. But then we also saw like 9 tight ends that scored in a range that would have been considered like top 6 or better the previous couple years. Mm-hmm. So does that mean it's deeper? I don't know about that. Does that mean that there's maybe more names coming in quicker and being able to get to that level quicker as rookies, as second-year guys? I think that might be true. We saw guys like Jake Ferguson, Trey McBride, obviously Laporta, Kincaid. Those guys came right in and basically finished inside the top 10 or better as rookies, which used to be rare. Yeah. But I think now just the way people treat the position in a best ball format where I don't need in that tournament, especially if we're planning to do 40 plus teams, which that was our plan. I don't need to beat everybody at tight end. Now we're thinking about maybe sprinkling in a little bit of, we want to get a Laporta, McBride, we want to get a couple of those, maybe 1 or 2 teams with those players. But generally you get to round 15 and beyond and you're still able to take Noah Fant, Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith. I mean, those guys, are they that big of a difference than the players that are going in round 7, 8, 9, 10? Other than maybe you saw it last year. And I think the power of best ball, 3 tight end builds, you also have to commit to a 3 tight end build. You probably don't want to go 2 tight ends and then you're not taking one until round 15 or beyond. That's probably too slim. But it's a roster construction thing. If there's a position to punt and kind of stream with 3 different ones in best ball, it's tight end. So that's why we've taken that approach so often.
And that makes perfect sense as far as you want to build it. And it, like you said, worked in 2023. Not to say that it's going to work in 2024, but we know it has worked before. Moving on to Indianapolis. No, we're not talking about the scouting combine yet. We will get into that for sure. But I do want to talk about Michael Pittman here. And maybe this is, you're going to tell me business as usual, and that's fine. But we do know that he has been tagged by the Indianapolis Colts, a franchise tag. They could not reach a long-term deal prior to the deadline. If he is playing under the tag in 2024, which it looks like he will be, just under $22 million. Hopefully they get something done in the next few months. Michael Pittman was awesome last year. 109 catches, 1,150 yards, and he was the number 1 wideout for Indy. Now, the question here is, and we can take this from a redraft angle, we can take this from a dynasty angle. Part of that season was with Anthony Richardson, and hopefully, as far as the Colts go, the entire season will be with Anthony Richardson this year. Currently, Michael Pittman is going as the wide receiver 18 at the 308 in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, Scott. I don't know how many shares you have of him. Does this tag change anything? Because it sounds like a long-term deal is going to happen. How are you handling Pittman this year?
Yeah, I actually think Pittman is just, he is what he is. He's like what I call an innings eater. He is somebody that I don't believe he had a top 6 week last year. I think the majority of his weeks ended between wide receiver 13 and 24. I'll give a quick plug. We have a tool over at Destination Devy called the Trinity Tracker. And it's what we consider to be the gold standard of wide receiver evaluation and prediction or predictive nature going forward. And it likes Pittman as pretty much what he is. He's a low-end wide receiver 1, but he also hits some of the metrics that you want to basically check off to say it's repeatable. So I don't think he has a ton of ceiling, but like you said, wide receiver 18, he's going in a range with a lot of other players you would probably put in the same bucket. But he does a little bit of everything. He can command an elite target share. He has a little bit of yak ability. And I don't think it really matters where the quarterback is or who the quarterback is with a guy like him. It matters for the peripheral weapons. If it's Richardson, I don't know if you're going to be able to go numerous receivers deep or a tight end. I mean, that remains to be seen. But I don't think it affects Pittman at all. I think he is what he is. He's an innings eater. I will say this. If you're drafting in best ball, I think there is a strategy. If you're picking a guy like Pittman or Devontae Smith is another one that kind of fits in this same range. Those are innings eaters. You probably don't want 4 of those on one team.
Mm-hmm.
You want to probably mix and match. For every Pittman, you take a George Pickens who had 3 games over 30 points. Tank Dell. Like, you probably want to mix and match the type of receivers you have, but I think you need a foundation. We'll get into that when we talk about building wide receiver rooms. You need a foundation, and he is one of those probably 5 or 6 foundation guys where I'm very confident he's going to give me 15 points a game. But I don't think he gives me much of a weekly ceiling.
Exactly. And talking about the ceiling, Joshua McCarthy already chimed in on YouTube right now. Pittman's best finish this season was 8th overall, and that was week 1. So after that, he was not a big spike week player as far as that goes. So I think that's good knowledge on that. Let's get into that later on in the show. And by the way, for more information on that Trinity tracker, the Trinity score, get on over to destinationdebbie.com to make sure you are hammering your wide receivers home properly for dynasty leagues and redraft leagues there as well. The Texans are in the news because they have re-upped on their contract or on their deal with one Dalton Schultz. Now, while this was reported, Scott, as a 3-year deal, I got to believe that this is more like a 1-year deal with some funny money included in it, as the kids say. 3 years, $36 million. Last year, just under 60 catches, just over 600 yards. He gets in the end zone 5 times with CJ Stroud. He missed a couple of games. I don't really know if this is, he was great with Stroud last year, or very good with Stroud last year. I don't feel like we should be excited for year 2 for Dalton Schultz, but currently in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, if you want him on your team, he is going as tight end 15. So he's not being selected as a starter. You can get him in the late 8th round. Does that feel right to you, or am I underestimating how good he's going to be this coming year?
I think you might be underselling him a little bit. I do think he's a very safe bet to be at the bottom end of the tight end range that I was talking about last year. That's where he finished. I don't see a reason why he can't finish there again. I do think the reason he was tight end 15 was, remember when he left Dallas, people completely buried him. And even in Dynasty, there was a window where, okay, if he's not in Dallas, the analysis on him was, I don't really want him. But then he landed in a spot with probably a better quarterback, and you're probably saying, okay, I'm a little more in on him now if he's going to be the starter. And then he was a tight end 1 last year. And then again, if he leaves Houston, bulky, can it get any better than it has been for him in the first couple years of his career? You probably are like, no. But I'm looking at the contract. It looks like it's probably a 2-year commitment.
Okay.
And I don't see why he doesn't go anywhere if he's as good as he's been in the last couple years in those 2 seasons. So I think he's probably undervalued, but I also bet that now that we have the news that he signed there, it hurts one of the tight ends we were taking at the end. We were taking Brevin Jordan at the end for the same reason. Like, hey, he's tied to CJ Stroud. Right. He's a perfect tight end 3. You're probably not taking him anymore, and you probably are going to move Dalton Schultz up into the top 12, depending on where you have like a guy like Jatavian Sanders. Where does he go? Does he move up a little bit? But I think he's undervalued because I think the Texans landing spot, people are going to see that as about as best as it could have gotten.
So just talking about the Texans pass catchers real quick. Tank Dell is going to be coming back this year, obviously coming off the injury. Nico Collins was a find last year, and there's still talk that the Texans might invest a premium pick into a wide receiver this year. Does that scare you off Dalton Schultz at all at the end of the 8th round? Because a rookie receiver might throw a little bit of a wrench into the plans of Schultz being a successful, top 10, top 15 guy this year.
It doesn't. Only because I think there's a lot of situations that are very similar to the Texans. I think you could say Cincinnati's similar, Philadelphia's similar, Jacksonville's similar. Like, there's a lot of teams where you go, all right, if Jacksonville keeps Calvin Ridley, but then drafts a receiver, how do you slot in them in the pecking order? Same with Cincinnati. Let's say they sign a tight end and they draft a receiver. Philly takes a receiver. Like, all of these are kind of the same. I think if they took a receiver, it probably makes you have to question, should Tank Dell and Nico Collins be going in round 3 and round 2 respectively, versus it affects Dalton Schultz. It doesn't, typically the receivers don't pull the targets away from the tight end, at least the expectations of what we have for a guy like Schultz. He doesn't need 140 targets. If he gets to 100, CJ Stroud's efficiency alone is probably going to carry him close to the top 12, if not higher. So I don't think it affects him as much as it would the receivers.
Former champion many times over in the FFPC, John Terry, is chiming in, watching on YouTube tonight. He's got a Dynasty trade facing him. Scott, what side would you rather be on here? Dalton Schultz and the 105 or Dalton Kincaid?
Well, if it's a single QB or a super flex, it matters. If it's super flex, you're obviously taking the 105 and Dalton Schultz. I would take the 105 alone over Dalton Kincaid. 105 in the single. If it's single QB, I think you're getting and you're counting. Okay, Balky, would you take Brock Bowers over Dalton Kincaid? I think that's probably a decent debate, but I think you could argue Bowers is even potentially a bet to get Kincaid. And then you have what I think is going to be 3 receivers that go in the top 10 of the draft. You would take them over Dalton Kincaid. So you're right. You're right on the cusp there with that 105. Like, do you want to gamble that there's a running back that goes somewhere great? That there's a 4th receiver that goes to the Chiefs, or like, who's your wide receiver 4, if you'd have to say in this class, Bulky, assuming you have Nabers, Marv, and Odunze 1, 2, 3, or somewhere in that order. Who would you say is 4?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think Worthy would be considerable because of his 40. Keon Coleman, I was really high on, and then I saw the metrics, and I've seen smart people kind of talk me off of him at this point. So I don't know, like when it comes down to like the number 4, like it's such a big drop off, like it's a significant drop off when you consider, who you're taking after that big 3. I think you could look at Troy Franklin, although I'm not a huge Troy Franklin guy. I know Theo Greminger is huge into Troy Franklin over at Player Profiler. Brian Thomas, I guess, I don't know. Like to me, it's not a clear cut.
But the fact that we've named a couple different players, you could say Trey Benson could be the RB1, Xavier Worthy, Brian Thomas, Troy Franklin. This pick represents essentially your choice of any of those. All you need is somebody to hit a spot where, and we talk about this all the time on Destination Devy, it's called ADV, artificial dynasty value. It doesn't even have to be a great result, but I bet you that 105 has some ADV. There's going to be a player that goes somewhere where people go, I have to have him. Trey Benson lands in Dallas and he's the starter. I have to have him. Brian Thomas lands in Buffalo and he's the second receiver. I have to have him. You know what I mean? So I think that the smart side, if you're just building equity and value, is to take the pick in Dalton Schultz, and you're just betting that Dalton Schultz tied to CJ Stroud gives you close to what Kincaid could. And I don't think you're trading Kincaid for any more than probably what you're getting in this deal. So I'm taking the package here. Now that I think through it, I'm taking the package. Yes.
Okay. And you get Schultz to replace Kincaid, and you might get Bowers too. I mean, you never know what's going to happen there. So hopefully that helps you out, John Terry. Russell Wilson, mother of God. What the news we got this week? Ian Rappaport reporting that the Denver Broncos have told the quarterback that he is going to be released. He was acquired from the Seahawks, if you remember, for 2 first-round picks, a second-round pick, a 5th-round pick, and players, I believe it was Noah Fant, Drew Lock, and a defensive lineman who's escaping my memory right now. Signs a 5-year, $242 million contract, $161 in guaranteed money. He's going to earn $39 million in guaranteed money for the Broncos in 2 seasons. It's a 6,600-yard, 42 touchdown, 19 pick line. He was 11-19. If Wilson is designated as a post-June 1st cut, he's going to count as a $35 million dead cap hit this year and a $50 million cap hit in 2025. This, according to Spotrac.com. Holy cow, this was huge. We do know that there's going to be a new quarterback in Denver, Scott. Your thoughts not only on drafting Russell Wilson in Dynasty right now, not in Dynasty, in redraft right now, but your thoughts on drafting guys like Jerry Jeudy, Cortland Sutton, these past Marvin Mims for all that, for as long as we're talking about it. You talk about those guys right now without Russell Wilson, and then Russell Wilson going on his own. There's a lot of moving pieces here in the Never Too Early FFPC best ball tournament.
There is, but Balky, I'm going to say that this is another quarterback in Russell Wilson that he's going off the board like quarterback 9 or 29 or 30.
30.
Like he's at the quarterback 30. You're seeing him down with, all right, I think we got sniped on him today in a draft. We ended up taking JJ McCarthy, and it was like, that's probably the last starter left. And the quarterback right before him was Russell Wilson. So he's literally going off the board, and he has been for the last 6 weeks, priced at a point where he's not going to start. And I actually think it's the opposite. I mean, listening to the Russell Wilson contract situation, for every dollar he doesn't take with his new team, Denver has to pay it. So the word is he's going to sign for $1 million a year. Now you think about the quarterback prices to get Baker Mayfield, Kirk Cousins, even a backup like a Gardner Minshew is going to cost you $8 to $10 million a year. And he's basically publicly saying, I'm going to play for $1 million. So you don't think a team is going to go, okay, wait a second. Maybe he isn't better than Baker Mayfield, or he isn't better than Kirk Cousins, but him for $1 million is a pretty good deal. That's like a rookie contract. So I think he's going to be very coveted. I think he's going to sign very quickly. And it's a Super Bowl winning quarterback. And he wasn't awful last year. He wasn't great. There's been plenty of film people that have said he was horrible, didn't run what Sean Payton wanted. So his stats were a little, I don't want to say inflated, but like they protected him for his stats more so than he put up stats. But you look at his numbers and you go, okay, is this guy capable of just managing an offense? I think he is. He shouldn't be going quarterback 30. There's no way he should be going ahead of guys like Will Levis or, there's just guys that I'm like, all right, I would be willing to take him over some players that have a little risk. 20 QBs higher than or lower than Justin Fields, Balky. Talk about risk,
That's what's crazy is like, guys like Bryce Young, Daniel Jones, Will Levis, to your point, are all going. Daniel Jones.
That's another one. Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy when you look at it. And if he does indeed sign for that, let me ask you this 2-part question. Where do you think Russell Wilson plays next year? And number 2, who do you think is the first quarterback domino to fall when we talk about guys like Wilson and Cousins and Justin Fields? Free agency is going to get underway on Monday, and we're going to find out where some of these guys are going to be going. Who do you think is the first guy to fall so we can kind of figure out where all these other guys are going to be falling into?
I think it'll be Russell Wilson, honestly. I think there's a chance he gets signed right away, like right when free agency opens, right when the legal tampering period opens, when you start, that Monday afternoon at noon, everyone's going to be glued to their phones because it's going to be all the same dozen people that are just breaking. This player plans to be traded here. This player plans to sign an offer sheet here. I mean, it's a wild 2 days worth of news. I think he may be the first domino because I think it's very simple. He plays this year for a cheap deal. He's looking to rehab his image, but I don't think he's probably as concerned with the future past this year, where I think Kirk Cousins is going to be a little more selective where he goes. And it sounds like he's going to be very specific on the type of contract he gets. Justin Fields is going to have to be traded. It sounds like the market on him is not what everybody wants it to be. So I think he's definitely being overdrafted, but I think it's Russell Wilson. And I'll just say this. I can see the story where it doesn't take them out of the running of drafting a QB, but Balky, he goes to the Raiders.
Oh,
and it's so he can play Denver twice a year. He knows the division, but he goes to the Raiders so he can play Denver twice a year. And that would be, did you care about the Broncos Raiders games coming up this year? If that happens, you certainly will.
You totally will, and we'll see what happens with the NFL schedule makers if that happens, and he goes to the Raiders. That will be a fun television. Sean Payton versus Russell Wilson. I'd love to see that. Let's get into one more thing here before we break. Mike Evans signed a 2-year, $52 million contract with the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, $35 million guaranteed money. Evans said that he wanted to play on a team with an elite quarterback this year, so I would imagine he's probably not going to get that in Tampa, but Baker Mayfield is no small consolation prize. We saw what he was capable with Mayfield last year. He's going to be 31 at the start of the 2024 season. 1,255 yards last year was his most in 5 years. 15.9 yards per catch. That was the highest it's been in 4 years. And he's playing in a division that, quite frankly, is not great. New Orleans, Atlanta, and Carolina there. So he could put up numbers again. Dave Canales, the offensive coordinator for Tampa, is now in Carolina this year as their head coach. I don't know, and I think I saw you tweet about this. Like, as far as Dynasty goes, this does not move the needle for you much with Mike Evans re-upping with Tampa, right, Scott?
No, it doesn't. I actually think there was a little bit of overdrafting of Mike Evans going on with the hopes that he goes somewhere better than Tampa Bay. And I'm looking at, some of the receivers that go after him or around him. I mean, we already mentioned Michael Pittman, but there's some guys that are going after him. DK Metcalf, Drake London, Jaylen Waddle. They're going around in the range where Mike Evans is. So we've been avoiding Mike Evans. I'm not a fan of drafting 30-plus-year-old receivers. Even at this point, I'd much rather take somebody like Waddle or Metcalf or Drake London just because I don't think you're losing a ton from there, but I also think you're hitting a potential ceiling with a couple of the guys. Like Drake London, if they got Kirk Cousins, I think has a far higher ceiling than somebody like Mike Evans. And Mike Evans is just a steady Eddie, but we've been avoiding him. So I think it's just status quo. He'll fall a little bit. Because I think people were thinking, oh, man, if he leaves, he's going to the Chiefs. He's going to ring chasing again. He's going somewhere better. And he's just back with Baker Mayfield, which is fine if Baker re-signs with the Bucs. But I do think that Canales thing is an interesting point. They hired I'm a Kentucky fan. They hired the offensive coordinator from Kentucky. And that wasn't, I know it's college, but I didn't look at him as like, man, that's a guy I really want running my NFL offense. So I don't know if it gets better than last year. I just don't like to bet on players in his situation.
We will bet on the knowledge that Scott Connor is about to drop on running backs and quarterbacks in this year's draft. You know him from Destination Debbie and Dynasty Trades in 5. Charles Chill, FFB on the X. Let's take a quick break. We won't be going long. When we come back, where does Scott Connor stand on these players? It's the Rookie Backfield Edition. I'm Eric Balkman. He's Scott Connor. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network.
If you're not playing Dynasty Fantasy Football right now, where we're still out there doing all sorts of trades and moves, everybody else that does like casual gamers that do redraft, they're done, and they're just kind of speculating or like talking about the draft. We're still playing. Like if you play Dynasty, we play all year. I play over at FFPC. If you want to play there, use promo code COOP, COOP. We'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more at myffpc.com. And there's 2 ways to jump in over there. You can either do a startup, in which case you can get Dalton Kincaid way after guys like Sam Laporta and Trey McBride. Brock Bowers, I just saw that the rookie Brock Bowers, even before the draft, they're projecting him to go as like the tight end 2 in these startup drafts. Crazy, right? Like right after Laporta, which is nuts. Like you can get Kincaid, or if you don't want to do a startup, I think this is even more fun. You go out and take over an orphan team, right? So over at FFPC, they never close the leagues down. They just take the teams and if somebody has to leave or whatever, then you can buy in and take that team. So you can go find a team that has Kincaid and a bunch of players you like, and you keep those players, and then you look at all the other players you don't like, and you have the golden opportunity to trade them away. Like it's so much fun to take a team and be like, okay, you know what? Because if you do a startup, you love all the guys already. Like those are your babies. If you do an orphan team, then you can trade away all the guys you don't like, and that's even more fun. Honestly, you have the golden, the green light there. So go to myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more, and you'll give you a leg up versus starting your own league. Not going to chase people down for dues. You got to pay your own money. So go get set up over there.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Better Sports Network. He's Scott Connor from Destination Debbie and, of course, Dynasty Trades in 5. I'm Eric Balkman from the High Stakes Fantasy Football or the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. And, of course, the Fantasy Football Players Championship. We've been talking a lot about the Never Too Early tournaments that Scott's participating in. Let me tell you a little bit about them. You just go to myffpc.com right now to play in either one of the 2 Never Too Early tournaments we have going. They're going to run all the way up until the NFL draft. They're going to end April 25th. Best ball slim rules, no kickers, no defenses in this 20-round draft, 14-week regular season, 3 weeks of playoffs, and then we crown a champion. Drafts are available with a 30-second, 60-second, 2-hour, and 6-hour clock. take your shot at a $25,000 grand prize if you want to play in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. We also have a Superflex Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. $35 to enter that, and you'd win 10 grand in that. Don't forget the Fantasy Pros Championship is live. The earliest we've ever had it this year. We've had drafts going on for about 2.5 weeks or so now. It's a $1 million grand prize. Once again, a $6 million prize pool. Don't forget about that $50 discount if you get a 3-pack of Fantasy Pros Championship teams. We will be talking a lot of Dynasty on the show tonight. Orphan Dynasties available at myffpc.com, myffpc.com. Some as little as $1. A lot of them had prices lowered. You can play fantasy football 365 days a year like Scott Connor does when you play Dynasty over at myffpc.com. So let's get into the running backs. And I think a good way to preface this conversation is John Terry's comment in the chat right now, watching us on YouTube. Is this one of the toughest years to rank the rookie running back, Scott? I can't remember one like this recently. And quite frankly, when you don't have Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs, projected as top 10 or first round picks or anything like that, it does get a little bit more difficult. How crazy has it been for you, Scott, when you look at this year's running back class?
Well, it's one of those classes where you saw the best running back in the class that was projected there for 2 years, Travion Henderson, go back to college. So that probably would have been most people's favorite. Another running back that was up there, Raheem Sanders, had a terrible season last year, went back to college, transferred. Donovan Edwards, another running back that was up there, went back to school. So I think you're starting to see the position maybe take a little bit longer than we anticipated. Because what's the rush? If you're not going to get drafted high, if you're not going to go and be able to have a role right away, if there's any questions, it kind of makes sense to go back to school, get paid in the NIL. So that's a different argument, but it makes these running back classes, and I think it's going to continue to be like this going forward, even in next year's class, which has a lot of better names and pedigree coming in. I think a couple things are true. The running back market is very, very low for the whole league as a whole. So you're probably going to have a tough time projecting good draft capital for most running backs coming in, 95% of them. It's not just there's no Bijan, there's no Jahmyr Gibbs. Like, you're going to probably know those guys, and then they're going to get good draft capital. This year, you were just searching for a running back, and I actually still think there's a chance we don't see a running back in the first 2 rounds.
Wow.
And maybe that changes with the combine. Probably Benson, Jonathan Brooks, Blake Corum. One of them will go in the second round, maybe 2. But I don't think any longer can we just say, Bulky, we're going to let draft capital guide us to what running backs we like. I think now the running back position is becoming all about opportunity, immediate opportunity. As long as you're drafted in the, let's call it mid-second to end of the 4th round, all those guys are the same, meaning I have to see where they land. I have to see who's on their depth chart. I have to see what the scheme is before I'm willing to go, okay, this guy went in late round 2. This guy went in mid round 4. Mm-hmm. In years past, we would have gone, man, the day 3 running back, I don't like him. But now we see winning running backs coming from all over the place. The scrap heap, the 7th round, the 5th round. I mean, look at Kyron Williams, 5th round. Isaiah Pacheco, 7th round. Guys coming back from nowhere. Darrell Henderson signed off the street, startable for a couple weeks, and then cut. Deontay Foreman back after an Achilles injury. I mean, they're firing from everywhere. So I don't think we can use draft capital. And now it's just like, hey, this is a class that has 8 to 12 intriguing guys, and I still don't really know how to rank them. I think it's, for me, more of which ones do I want exposure to given what everybody else is going to think. Meaning, like, there's going to be some guys I'm going to have to be willing to take higher than I probably want based on how I'm playing the running back position if I want exposure to them, just as the community sees them as, the RB1, 2, 3. So it's going to be hard to get those guys unless you're willing to bite the bullet in a couple leagues.
I think you're right. And I think that's spot on analysis about how the running back position has changed in dynasty leagues so far this year. Speaking of dynasty leagues, don't forget, in the description for this show tonight, you can also click on that link. It will take you to myffpc.com. You can register for those dynasty leagues and, of course, register for those tournaments as well. Okay, Scott, let's find out where you stand on a lot of these guys here. I'm going to kick things off with Florida State running back Trey Benson, 4.39 40-yard dash at the scouting combine, 6 feet tall, 216 pounds. He ends up with a 9.77 relative athletic score, and a lot of people think he is the best back in this class. Do you believe he's the best running back in this class? You said maybe he sneaks into the second round. Scott Connor, where do you stand on Trey Benson?
I think if you had to pick a favorite to be the RB1, it's him. I think he's a poor man's profile. If you look at somebody like Breece Hall or Joe Mixon, he's a poor man's version of that. But I think for me, other people are going to be searching for that and chasing it. So I think he's going to be the RB1 in more leagues than not, which means I'm probably priced out of taking him. Just because even if he lands in a spot where you're like, okay, because here's the other thing. We evaluate landing spots a lot of times based on opportunity, but also the scheme and the other players that are on the depth chart. What I'm done doing, Balky, is looking at a running back and saying he's so talented that he is just going to push everybody else on the depth chart out of the way. Maybe eventually, but if we're talking like redraft, especially, it's hard for me to look at a guy last year like Kendre Miller and just say he's going to overtake the job from Alvin Kamara and Jamal Williams. Whether you think those guys are good or past their prime or not, that's a tough battle to overcome as a rookie. So I think that almost matters more than anything. So there could be Trey Benson as the RB1 off the board, but are you really excited? I'll give you a hypothetical landing spot. Are you excited if Trey Benson goes to the Buccaneers?
Yeah, not terribly.
It feels like a Ken Walker, Zach Charbonnet situation, right?
Totally,
something similar to that versus there's going to be a guy that goes around later and you go, okay, well, that guy only has to beat out this guy. That guy only has to beat out this player. And you may like Trey Benson better, but it's hard for me to say, I don't have the arrogance to go, I just know he's going to take over the backfield. And especially in like FFPC, when you get into fantasy pros and the main events, like people forget it's a short regular season, you know, and there's so much running back turnover. You don't have 6 weeks to wait for this guy to get an opportunity. So like, it's not a 17, 18 week season. Like you can't even get there unless you get, you know, production in the first 12 weeks. So I think that's a big thing to remember. And we lose that. We just think, Trey Benson's a stud. Whoever's in his way, he's going to overtake him. And by week 4, it's going to be his backfield. It's not that simple.
It's not that simple at all. And I think more than ever, and you kind of just were talking about this landing spot, it might dictate how we draft these guys because pre-draft, they're all very tightly bunched together. Another guy that, again, could be the number 1 running back off the board. He could be the number 5 running back off the board. Wisconsin's Braelon Allen, a player that many people in the industry, myself included, said that wait till he tests at this combine and everybody's going to be talking about it. And then he didn't test so well at the combine. He's got to work on those jumps for his pro day. He didn't run the 40 at the combine. This is a player, and I don't know how much this goes into it as well, Scott. He started playing basically at 17 years old for the Badgers, and he looked like he had a Big Ten body back then. Now, I don't know how much people thought he was going to develop at all as far as from a physical standpoint. There's only so much you can do. One of the things I did see him evolve into this past season at Wisconsin was his pass catching chops because of the new air raid system that Phil Longo brought in from North Carolina to Wisconsin under Luke Fickell. We did see him catch more passes this year, which is always a big thing. But the testing numbers, you know, at the combine, they left a little bit to be desired. Where do you stand on Braelon Allen?
Yeah, I think a couple things. So for season-long redraft, I think he's just a guy. He's probably going to get moderate to decent draft capital, but it's not going to be – I wouldn't be shocked if he's not one of the first 5 running backs off the board. But again, that doesn't matter. Like what I just said, it doesn't matter as long as he goes in a certain range, about a 75 to 80 pick range between middle of round 2 and end of round 4. Like I don't really care what the capital is in that range. But I also think for one thing I wanted to mention when you're evaluating guys like Braelon Allen for Dynasty, I'm going to be much higher on him in Dynasty, and it's not going to be for what you think. I don't care if a running back is 20 or 23 or 24. What I do care about is that other people care about that a running back is 20. Meaning, I think there's going to be a longer leash with a guy like Braelon Allen, and we'll get to the next guy, Jonathon Brooks, as well. I think there are extra outs for somebody like Braelon Allen in Dynasty. If you draft him, like I'll give you a name. Do you feel good if you have this guy on your Dynasty roster, Tank Bigsby?
No, I do not.
Tank Bigsby was a good Devy prospect. He made it to the NFL. He got decent draft capital, but was so bad as a rookie. Arguably one of the worst, if not the worst running back in the league. And now you're like, okay, who is the next guy that I can just replace him with? That quick. I don't think that's going to happen with Braelon Allen. I think Braelon Allen will be, well, he came into the league. He's the youngest running back ever to make it to the NFL. He's going to start at 20 years old. I'll give him another year. Meaning in year 2, if he's just, let's say he gets 75 touches and he's not horrible. Year 2, there's going to be someone going, man, just wait till he takes over that backfield. Yeah. Wait till this veteran next to him leaves. Oh, man, it's all Braelon Allen. Like, I want some Braelon Allen for that narrative alone, which will not exist with a lot of running backs. A lot of other running backs, if they only have 75 opportunities as a rookie, all right, who's going to take his job next year? So we'll get to Jonathon Brooks next, but I think that's my take on Braelon. I'm higher on him in Dynasty just for I think there's going to be more opportunity in a longer window than there is with most running backs.
Yeah, and it makes perfect sense, right? Because of how young he is. I did not realize he's the youngest running back to make it to the NFL. That's crazy to me. Good knowledge from you, Scott. So let's talk about Jonathon Brooks here. He said he told Stacey Dales that probably about a week or so ago that he plans on being ready and recovered by July 1st. He played 3 seasons at Texas, tore his ACL in November, and he was having a great season here. He is, just like everybody else, always ahead of schedule with these ACL injuries. And you could see somebody who needs a running back taking him potentially in the late 2nd, probably the 3rd round. He's 20 years old, 6.2 yards per carry on 238 carries for Texas over the last 3 years, 15 rushing touchdowns in his last 18 games. I've talked to a lot of people that said, had he not torn the ACL, this guy would be the slam dunk #1 running back in this class. Scott, where do you stand on Jonathon Brooks?
Yeah, Balky, I'm not liking the narrative that he's going to be fully recovered by July 1st because
I'm not either.
I kind of like the idea of, I was mentioning Jonathon Brooks as another guy where if he comes in and there's just any question mark whether he's going to be ready, what does he have? A built-in excuse for year 1. And I think if you're drafting running backs, especially in Dynasty now, if you're drafting running backs, anything that gives you more than a year-long window of like, what did you do for me right now matters. So the fact that he's almost making it known that I'm ready to go by July 1st, which means if that's the case, if we see him out there in training camp, I think that we know how our industry is. It's going to shift to, all right, he's ready to go. You know what I mean? I'm treating him like any other rookie, where what I kind of wanted was, all right, he's not quite ready. We're kind of moving him along slowly. And then midway through the year, he comes back and he looks okay. But going into year 2, there's an excuse. Well, he was coming off that knee injury. We didn't really expect. Remember the Jameson Williams argument? Yeah. He came back and played half his rookie year, but he was awful. But it was, we didn't expect him to even play. So the fact that he got on the field, okay, that's all we expected. So it's his value just maintains or goes up. That's what I wanted from Brooks. But if he's going to come back and it's like we're treating him like any other rookie, not coming off an injury, I don't know if he has that extra aspect to his profile. So I won't be as interested if that's the case.
So as it stands right now with Brooks, you're more excited about him in Dynasty than redraft, correct?
I think him and Allen are both guys that are going too high in redraft just because I think they're all thrown into the same bucket. There's about 8 rookie running backs that we've been drafting, but some of them are going to work and some of them aren't. Yeah. Remember Izzy Abanikanda last year? This time of year, he was in the top 6 or 7 going off the board at running back. He went a little later than some others, but he went to a spot where he was dead on arrival. As soon as he got drafted to the Jets, it was over. Yeah. Even if Rodgers would have stayed healthy, it wasn't going to work. So there's going to be a couple of those, unfortunately.
Happens every year. Let's talk about Blake Corum here from Michigan. This is another player that I think there are more than a few people will have him as their #1 running back. 5'7", 205 pounds, and he runs a 4.53 at the 40. You were hoping for something better there. I think a lot of people have been comping him to Devontae Freeman, the former Florida State running back that carved out a nice career in the NFL with Atlanta. Corum could still be the first running back off the board, but I'm not excited about it like I would have been before. Scott, where do you stand on Blake Corum?
Yeah, for me, he would be the one that I'm most interested in. I think he's going to get the draft capital in that range. That's almost a lock. But I also think he's probably the one that has I'm going to give a shout out to one of the co-hosts over at Destination Debbie, Jordan Richards, co-host of the Wake Up with Ray G and Jay Rich show. And he said an awesome quote the other day that I think really resonates. and it was people are always looking for 3 down running backs, right? 3 down skill set, bell cow running backs. But it isn't the way that you use running backs to compete in leagues now. You don't need, I mean, sure, there's going to be 2 or 3 running backs that just are a massive positional advantage. But everybody else, you just want to kind of get by, right? How many teams do you draft, Balky, where you just like, I need to get enough running backs to just get me through?
Mm-hmm.
I need to just maintain adequate production. What's really going to help me win is if I have an elite quarterback, an elite tight end, a couple receivers that are super good. The running backs kind of just need to get me through. Like, don't make me be taking 2, 3, 4 points a game. You know, I need to have adequate production. But his quote was that you want guys with 3 down skill sets, but it's not because they need to get all the work. It's because when there's work available, they can fill numerous roles. And I think that's Blake Corum. I think he can be somebody that can step in any system, any scheme, but I think you can put him on the field for any sort of situation, whether it's an early down runner or a 3rd down runner or, 2-minute drill. Like, I think he can step in any role, but I don't think that means just because he goes somewhere, he's a 3 down back and he gets all the touches. But I think there's going to be somebody that goes, I'm drafting him because he can do everything. And that's what I really want. If I'm drafting the way I roster construct, that's what I'm looking for. So he would be my RB1 if I had to draft today. Okay.
All right. So that's interesting. RB1, and just to clarify, RB1 for redraft and dynasty or just redraft?
For redraft, definitely. For dynasty, I got to say, I think the fact that Braelon Allen and Jonathon Brooks have that extra gear to their profile that people will forgive and still have some demand for, I would probably lean those 2 over him, especially Brooks if he go good, and probably Benson for the capital. Still, people will buy into 2nd round draft capital if Benson goes there. But redraft, yes, I think I feel safest with taking Corum.
Yeah, I think that's the other thing too. Is like, we don't want to have these pie in the sky expectations for running backs. Not everybody is going to be this 3 down wunderkind. It doesn't happen anymore. And I think you're right. And you've seen this. I think you've been tweeting about it too, or Xing about it. Wide receiver, like that is where it's at in dynasty right now. And like in running backs, you kind of just got to fill in the cracks and make yourself just dominant enough to get to the playoffs, and then we'll see what happens there for sure. Getting back to dynasty here, Jaylen Wright. This is a player I have talked with so many people about that they don't want me talking about him, Scott. They're like, stop talking about Jaylen Wright, because once he gets to the NFL, once he gets drafted, he's the type of guy that can really, really lay in the weeds, and then when you select him, can perform big time in 2024. Do you share that view, Scott? Right now, where do you stand on Jaylen Wright?
Yeah, I think he's probably one that's a little more polarizing. I've heard very smart people talking about what type of player he is, because I'm not, again, I did not come from a football background. I enjoy watching it, but I'm not the one you want to sit next to and explain what's actually happening. But I've heard enough smart people talk about Jaylen Wright that he was very, very system dependent, very much a guy that was a one-trick pony. Now, that can be good for fantasy. I think there's certain roster builds where I go, I want to have a guy like Jaylen Wright. If I've started my draft, I have a team where we started with Brian Robinson and Najee Harris. That's the kind of team I'm like, let me just take Jaylen Wright as my RB3. That's already a weak team, but give me a guy where I can throw in there, and I don't want to comp him to Devon A-Chain because I think that's a little lazy to do that. But I think that type of, like Jaylen Warren is a perfect example. Jaylen Warren was your perfect RB2 where you're probably frustrated with him half the games, but the other half, if you didn't have him in your lineup, you were upset because he dropped 26 points. Like that's how I'm building running back rooms around somebody like Jaylen Wright. I don't want him necessarily or prioritize him if I've drafted somebody like A-Chain and Gibbs. If that's how I've started, I'm probably going in a little bit of a different direction, or I don't need to take the risk on somebody like Wright. So he's more boom or bust for me.
Okay. So he's more, and I think, isn't that sort of the theme of this year's running back class? More boom or bust, right? Like there's no locked on guy here that we can focus on. So Will Shipley is another interesting guy, and we'll move on to him. He was a player that was at Clemson. And I have heard I've heard, I don't want to say polarizing because he's not, but I've heard some people really like him. Most people are kind of like meh about him when he gets to the next level. Scott, where do you stand on Will Shipley?
I think he's undervalued. I think we've kind of let him go under the radar, but Balky, he's been a guy that's been great, basically since year one. Like he came in right away as a true freshman and handled almost 200 touches at Clemson. You know what I mean? This isn't like he walked into a bad team and, they've fallen a little bit, but he's been good his entire career. Anybody that plays Devy has had Will Shipley on the radar since his freshman year. And it just feels like because he didn't become elite, or he didn't become Christian McCaffrey, or he didn't go from, and we do this a lot. Players are really good early, and we just assume the next year they're going to get 20% better, and the next year they're going to get 20% better, and then by the time they're ready for the NFL, they should have been absolutely amazing. Mm-hmm. Will Shipley was just the same, basically his whole career. So does that mean he's great in the NFL? I don't know, but I do not think people should be taking him outside of the top 6 running backs. Like there's nothing to say he can't just be, he's the next man up on a depth chart and he's just waiting for an opportunity. Does he go day one to a place getting opportunity? I don't know about that, but I think he should probably be going higher than what he has been. He's been going super late, very late.
Do you think he has the chops to put, if he's an injury away type guy, that he is playing all 3 downs and not being subbed out? Does he have the talent to do that? Does he have the skill set to do that?
I think he's somebody that did it in college, but we don't profile him as somebody that's going to do it. So I don't think he gets drafted to do that. That's the thing.
Right.
But there's been other guys that you've looked and you go, all right, did Chase Brown have that? Not necessarily, but I think he's better than Chase Brown. And Chase Brown was a premier handcuff that you had to have most of the season, and it didn't help you till the second half of the year. So I think at a minimum, he's that. But yet I look at like where some of these second-year running backs are going, guys like Chase Brown, Kendre Miller. I mean, why are they going 8 rounds higher than Will Shipley? To me, that doesn't really make sense to me. To me, they're all in the same bucket. Ty Chandler. Will Shipley's far better than Ty Chandler, I think. But Ty Chandler goes higher. So I think we're guessing on opportunity, and we're letting players that as soon as they're drafted, even if he's drafted in the middle of the 4th round, if he goes to, let's say he goes to the Bengals, okay? Will Shipley goes to the Bengals. Wouldn't you say he's closer to Chase Brown than they are right now? They're almost interchangeable, right? Maybe a round or 2 apart, but they shouldn't be viewed as one is the starter, one is the backup. It's like you want to have both because it's an ambiguous backfield. So he's just going too late.
I think, and the thing to consider, like in that scenario too, I think it's kind of a duplication of skills between those 2 players. But I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing, especially in today's NFL. If you have Shipley and Chase Brown, you can make that work, especially when you have Burrow and Chase and Higgins as well. Okay, here's a guy I was not talking about, or I hadn't heard a lot talked about until say last 3 weeks, and I've seen a lot of people be talking about Cody Schrader out of Missouri, how he is a player that needs to be going higher in drafts. Now, he was a walk-on at Missouri, became the lead running back, not last year, but the year before that. 276 carries, 1,600 plus rushing yards, 14 touchdowns, 22 catches, just under 200 yards on 28 targets. So that's really good from a production standpoint. However, he's not the fastest guy in the world. It seems like he's got the instincts to be a good running back in the NFL. 10th in the country in yards after contact, but his 3.07 yards after contact per attempt, it's not necessarily all that great. He is going to be drafted, whether that's day 2 or day 3, we'll see. But Scott, this guy might fall in the bucket of like mid-second round to like end of the 4th round type player that we need to be talking about not only for Dynasty, but for redraft as well. Where do you stand on Cody Schrader?
Well, I'm going to actually lump Cody Schrader and the next guy you have on the list, Ray Davis, into the same bucket. I think Cody Schrader is a poor man's Ray Davis, and Ray Davis is a poor man's Blake Corum. But I think generally all 3 fill the same role. I think if you like Blake Corum, you should be taking Ray Davis as well, because I think he steps into probably a backup role, but you're looking at him going, all right, he's the backup for every role on the team. So if there's an injury, I think they'll be trusting him to step in any of the roles that become available. So I would prefer Ray Davis over Cody Schrader, but we drafted a lot of Cody Schrader and a lot of Ray Davis right after the Senior Bowl. Maybe that was a little Senior Bowl bias. I'm not as heavy on drafting Cody Schrader right now in the best ball tournament, because I don't know if he gets the draft capital, Balky. I think he's one of the guys that may fall into the 5th or 6th round, which makes it a little bit tougher for me to say I have to have him on a best ball roster. Because if he is buried, if he's a 6th round pick, like that's a 0 for the whole season. So I've backed off taking him a little bit, but I think it's fair to say Ray Davis is a poor man's Blake Corum, and Cody Schrader is a slightly poorer man's Ray Davis.
Round 3, round 4 dynasty picks for sure, especially in the FFPC. We'll see how that ends up going. Now we're out of time here, but I'm going to lump all 3 of these quarterbacks into one, and I'll let you take it whichever way you want to take it. We're not going to talk about Caleb Williams. If you want to bring him up for comparison, please do so. But I do want to talk about Jayden Daniels, Drake Maye, and JJ McCarthy. We'll throw him in there because it seems like he's rising up boards right now. I don't want to say we could have 4 quarterbacks in the top 5, but there's a non-zero chance of it. Scott, where do you stand on these rookie quarterbacks this year as far as those top 4 guys go?
I think Caleb Williams goes in a fair place, so we don't really have to talk about him. I do think Drake Maye is probably undervalued a little bit. He goes behind Jayden Daniels in almost every draft I see. And is it crazy to think that maybe the community is just kind of buying into some of the negativity on Drake Maye and thinking, I mean, what is he not going to start, Balky? He's going to start. Yeah. You know what I mean? He's starting right away. So I think he should not be going outside of the top 20 QBs. Jayden Daniels goes a little higher just because I think people notice the upside. But I'll talk about McCarthy. Like, he is the last starting quarterback taken in these drafts. QB 31, QB 32. And I think it's QB 31 because after 31, there isn't a starter. Like, there's not a Pittsburgh starter being taken because nobody knows who it's going to be. So I think McCarthy's probably the value right now because he's going to move up. If he goes to a Minnesota or Atlanta or something, he's going to rise up ahead of, you can name a half a dozen QBs he's going to go over just simply because he got a good landing spot and he's going to play this year.
Where does the challenge come in Superflex drafts when you talk about, and we'll talk about Marvin Harrison coming up, but when you talk about these guys like Harrison and Nabers in comparison to like JJ McCarthy, like how do you sort of balance that right now? Because that, I guess we could just wait till after the NFL draft because not a lot of people are having their rookie drafts right now. But I think that's going to be compelling in Superflex leagues is when do you stop taking the quarterbacks and look at a guy like Harrison, Nabers, or maybe if running back goes high. I think that's pretty compelling.
It is. I do think it depends on your quarterback scoring too. When it's like lesser QB scoring, like 4 point per passing touchdown, I think you want to maybe temper the expectations of what a guy like Drake Maye could end up being. Because even if he's good, if you get a Tua Tagovailoa, like that's not moving the needle a lot. And one of the names on your screen, Daniels, Drake Maye, or McCarthy, there's a very good chance, Balky, one of those is a complete flame out.
Yeah.
Complete bust. Whereas I feel very confident if I'm drafting Malik Nabers, Marvin Harrison, or Odunze, even if they're not Jamar Chase or Justin Jefferson, guess what? Somebody is probably going to go, yeah, that guy's Drake London. He's DK Metcalf. Like, I feel like doesn't it feel safer to take the receiver than really pick one over Drake Maye or one over JJ McCarthy? It just feels safer now, given how the quarterback production has been the last year or two. But we could look back and go, really, you were taking Odunze over JJ McCarthy, or Drake Maye's the next Justin Herbert, and everybody regrets it because he was going 107 instead of 103, 104. So it can go both ways.
It could go both ways. And I think that after these guys get landing spots, as far as rookie drafts go, we'll have a better handle on it. But for redraft, still fun to draft these guys right now.
For sure.
That is where Scott Connor stands on the backfield in the NFL draft, the upcoming NFL draft. Let's get into hour number 2. We're going to talk about where Scott stands on the pass catchers. We have a ton of wide receivers on this list. I did also sneak in one tight end, so we'll talk about a tight end as well. That's not the tight end you're thinking. He's Scott Connor from Destination Debbie, Dynasty Trades in 5. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. Don't go anywhere. Stick around. Hour 2 of the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network starts right after this.
Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament is already open right now over at FFPC. Drafts are available daily, 2-hour clock or 6-hour clock, or the sit and go 30-second clock if you really just want to bang out a draft. Those are scheduled in advance, so you can go get set up on that. Take a shot, either $25,000 or $10,000 grand prize. That's in the Never Too Early Best Ball contest. They got some big prizes over there, man. And you can play high stakes games over there too. So you can hit this QR code that's right in front of my face, or go to myffpc.com. Use promo code COOP. COOP, they'll give you $25 off when you deposit $35 or more. So go get set up right now. We're doing, we already do our Dynasty, we do our redrafts over there, we do our high stakes stuff, but we do the playoff contest, we do it all. So I'm going to get in on the best ball too. It's never, for me, whatever you got, whatever contest you got, I'm going to play, I'm going to win. That's it. So go over to myffpc.com, use promo code COOP, and you can win as well.
You just saw all those names there. You can draft them right now in the FFPC when you go to myffpc.com, the Fantasy Pros Championship, the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, the Never Too Early Superflex Best Ball Tournament, all going on right now at myffpc.com. Don't forget, while you're there, you can start drafting these guys in the Dynasty rookie drafts coming up. Take over some Dynasty orphan squads. myffpc.com is where to go for that. Numerous squads have already had their 2024 entry fees lowered, some as low as $1. So make sure you're checking that out. myffpc.com and play fantasy football 365 days a year. We are joined tonight. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, obviously. Scott Connor from Dynasty, Destination Debbie, and Dynasty Trades and 5 joining me tonight. Follow him on the X at Charles Chill FFB, of course, at Destination Debbie and at Trades and 5 on the X as well. We tackled the running backs and quarterbacks, pun intended, in that last segment. Let's get into the receivers here, and who else would we kick it off with other than Marvin Harrison Jr., a player that has the pedigree. He is probably going to be the first skill position player taken off the board that's not a quarterback this year, a player that, doesn't have a whole lot of flaws in his game as far as a lot of rookies do coming into the NFL this season. You're going to have to pay a premium to get him. Scott, if I remember correctly, I was drafting against you. I was online drafting in the KFFSC earlier Super Bowl weekend. It seemed like you were taking a healthy share of Marvin Harrison Jr. in redraft leagues. Seems like I kind of know where you already stand on him, right?
Yeah, and it was amazing. I believe the first Never Too Early Best Ball draft, we took Marvin Harrison at the 506, Balky. 506, and now he's going in the second round. And when we were in Kentucky, he was going in the early part of the second round. He cracked the first round in one of the drafts in Kentucky. Now, Kentucky's a little bit more heavy receiver, but it was just amazing how the overcorrection for Marvin Harrison in redraft was like, I'm looking right now at the draft, wide receiver 30 in the first one. And now you're going, okay, he's wide receiver 9. You know what I mean? And it was quick. Nothing happened with him between, I think the best ball draft started January 19th. And like by the time it was early February, he's going in the second or third round. So it was weird to see where it's like people just didn't know the name. So they were just not sure. But I think it's overcorrected to a point. In Dynasty, there has never been a receiver that has entered the league with higher Dynasty value than Marvin Harrison. He's wide receiver 4 in Dynasty, wide receiver 5, depending on what source you use.
Yeah.
Like there's never been anybody that's entered higher than that. The highest was Jackson Smith-Njigba last year, like wide receiver 8 or 9. So, I mean, it's just, he's
and
great.
You're on board. I mean, he's worth the premium, it sounds like, for you.
You got to have exposure to him. I don't love having exposure to him literally at wide receiver 9, wide receiver 10. But what do you just not have any? You see the seasons from like Justin Jefferson and Jamar Chase, and you're like, if that's possible, if you get 90% of that, it was worth probably a top 3 pick, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, you almost have to get some exposure, but it definitely feels like if you're in formats where you got him a little earlier, you got him in the 3rd, 4th, 5th round, like it's too late. And then in Dynasty, I guess here's my question for you, Balky. If you have the pick to take Marvin Harrison in Dynasty, let's say you have 10 Dynasty leagues, you probably want to have him on a couple rosters, right? Maybe one
Absolutely.
or 2.
Yeah.
But
sure.
Isn't it hard not to just add a 2nd round pick to him and get Justin Jefferson or to get CeeDee Lamb or get Jamal? I mean, you're essentially not having to add much to go to the player where you already know is a top 3 receiver in the sport. And it's hard for him to go anywhere but just stay where he is. So it's very interesting because we've never seen a receiver like him come into the league. And he's coming in at the perfect time where everybody is obsessed with receivers.
Yeah.
People in Dynasty will go, give me 7 receivers before I even take another position. Just give me all receivers. So it's a perfect time for a guy like him to come in.
John Terry chiming in, it's impossible to trade for the 101 right now. And that might be the case. The thing is, like, if I had the 101, I'm not married to it, but I do know that pick will go up in value, or at least it should go up in value as we get closer and closer to the NFL draft. So I'd be remiss. I would be, remiss isn't the right word. I'd be reluctant to trade the 101 here on March 7th just to see what could happen going forward with that pick in late March or mid-April or even late April. I think that's part is compelling too. By the way, AJ Hernandez pointing out 8 spots left in the 125 never too early never too early best ball tournament. I can tell you that it's down to 7 spots, and it starts I believe in about a little less than 2 hours, so plenty of time to fill that up if you want to get some live drafting action in tonight after the show. I have seen a lot of people, smart people, talk about Malik Nabers in the same ballpark as Marvin Harrison Jr. I haven't seen anybody put him above Marvin Harrison Jr., but I have heard people talk about him in the same breath as MHJ. Where do you stand on Malik Nabers, Scott Connor?
I mean, back to what I just said. From a Dynasty perspective, he is the highest receiver coming into the league ever in Dynasty. The problem is there's another one in the class that's better than him, but he's already a consensus top 10 receiver. I think he's on par with Garrett Wilson, probably right there with Puka Nacua. What can you say? I mean, he's a little cheaper in redraft, but even he has moved up into like the 3rd round of these best ball drafts to where you got to have exposure to him. I would rather take him at his price than I would Marvin Harrison in redraft. But I think they're both good enough. They're both going to get probably top 10 draft capital. I mean, I've seen some mock drafts, Balky, where there's 3 receivers in the top 8, 9 picks. Mm-hmm. And if you're picked in the top 5 as a receiver, that is a different cohort than if you're drafted in the middle of the 1st round. To the point where I've seen people say, where did LSU get another Jamar Chase? Just watching him, and you're going like, oh, you know what? If there's even somebody halfway intelligent out there saying that's even in the range of outcomes, you got to have some. You got to find a way. Dynasty redraft, you got to get a little exposure to Nabers. And I'm in on Nabers over Marv at their price right now.
In never too early best ball tournaments, 212 is the average draft spot for Marvin Harrison Jr. Malik Nabers has an ADP of the 412 at wide receiver 27. So there are 12 receivers going off the board before Harrison, and then there's another 26, or there's 26 total going off the board prior to Malik Nabers being chosen. But they're both going in the top 4 rounds, rookie receivers. Another rookie receiver that is going high, his ADP, wide receiver 31 at the 605, so basically about a round and a half after Malik Nabers goes, is Odunze. Now, we talked about the big 3 at wide receiver at the top of the show. Odunze, I think part of the reason that he is not mentioned as the 1 or the 2 over these guys is I think he has, and stay with me on this one, a limited ceiling. I don't necessarily think that he has the speed. He has the explosiveness as those other 2 guys. However, good route runner, strong hands, polished guy, and I think he can come in and contribute right away. I think that's why he's number 3 and those other 2 guys are above him. But Scott, where do you stand on Odunze?
Yeah, I think after the combine and some of the comps I've heard people throwing out are like Devontae Adams, DeAndre Hopkins. I mean, if you're going to elicit those comps again at the price that he's going, you want to have some exposure to him. Mm-hmm. I do think the combine, maybe not from a actual profile standpoint, should raise him closer to Malik Nabers, but I think the consensus is starting to become wherever your tier break was before the combine, it's now almost including Odunze in that grouping. So in Superflex, you feel better now having the pick that's going to be Odunze or JJ McCarthy. You can almost lump them in to the guys that were going ahead of them before. I think in a single QB, you're probably thinking that 103 or 104 with Bowers and Odunze. You feel like we talked about earlier in the show, right?
Yeah.
105 feels like the spot where you're like, okay, I'm not sure what I'm going to get. I'm going to get my choice, but I'm not sure. But I think he's getting closer to that elite tier. I'm not putting him in the elite tier yet, but I think 1C, there's a 1A, 1B, 1C, 2A, you know what I mean? I think he's closer to that. There's a bigger tier break between him and the next receiver than there is between him and Nabers.
Well, let's talk about that next receiver here. And according to ADP, it is Malik Nabers' college teammate, Brian Thomas Jr. Brian Thomas had a unbelievable season in 2023, at least as far as his standards go. He more than doubled his previous high in catches. He had 68 catches for just under 1,200 yards, got in the end zone an amazing 17 times last year. Pretty crazy. One of the most productive wide receivers in the country last year as far as college football goes. I'm sure having a talented quarterback and having Malik Nabers on the other side of the field contributed to that a little bit. But this is a player that I think a lot of people are excited about, and rightfully so. If you miss out on the top 3 receivers, Brian Thomas, not a bad consolation prize, Scott Connor. Where do you stand on him?
Well, I mean, he's one of those that he's not the typical profile that you would be like, okay, I have to have this profile from like a production standpoint. But he was a good recruit. He played with a lot of, whether you think they're really good receivers or not, he played with other good receivers in college. So you got to give him a little credit for that. The fastest, I don't know if you know this, he was the fastest receiver in this draft class in college football in terms of like on-field speed during the season. And you look at him and when you hear the name Brian Thomas, I think a lot of people kind of classify him as like, he's the big outside receiver, right? Versus he's not DK Metcalf, but that's kind of more how you should be thinking about him, I think, versus like he's the big outside receiver that's not as fast as Nabers or Marvin Harrison. I mean, he ran a sub 4.40 at his size, and on the field speed was the fastest clocked receiver in the class. So I think he's probably the clear-cut wide receiver 4. But again, I do think he's more subject to the landing spot, like we talked about earlier in the show. There's a lot of landmine landing spots between pick 15 and 24 to where it's those teams we already talked about, like Cincinnati, Philadelphia, Jacksonville. I don't think people would go, I have to have him if he goes to one of those spots. Whereas the Buffalo landing spot, the KC landing spot, I think if he went to Dallas, people would embrace that. Tampa Bay was another one before Mike Evans, but I think if he went to a place like that, people would be a little hesitant. So I think he goes in the draft range, though, where people are going to be a little bit, I don't know. They're going to push other guys to go to better spots ahead of them.
Do you have a feel, Scott, on how many receivers you think are going to be drafted in the first round of the NFL draft? Because we know, you just mentioned those landing spots, those 10 landmine landing spots there, but it gets greener pastures are exhibiting themselves after those 10 spots. Do you have a feel like, is it 7 receivers? Is that too much? 6 receivers?
The record is 7. I think the over-under is 5.5. So I think 6 is probably the number that I would say if I had to bet right now, I would bet 6. But it's a good tackle class.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there's a chance that because there's so many good receivers in this class that you get to literally everyone that's listening, go pull up the draft order and just look at picks from like 15 to 24. And then there's a couple more spots after that where you're going, is there conceivably, how many teams would it be a luxury pick for them to take a receiver? And I think a lot of them it would be. So I do think the early second round, it's just team after team after team after team after team where you're like, I think we could take a receiver there. So I think it couldn't be 4 or 5. Now, the one thing saving it, Balky, is the fact that 3 could go in the top 9, which means all it takes is somebody goes, okay, 3 are already gone. We need to get one. Otherwise, there's going to be 10 off the board before we pick again in the second. So let's take one here, even if it's maybe a little higher than another player on the board. But I would bet 6.
6 sounds good to me. And obviously the end of the draft is very, very compelling as far as, like the other thing too, is what happens if the Cardinals, don't take Marvin Harrison Jr.? What happens if they trade the pick? What happens if they take a receiver at the end of the first round? Like all of a sudden that becomes more compelling. You mentioned Buffalo too. I think that's interesting. And then obviously Kansas City, who is drafting 32nd. I'm wearing my Florida State hat tonight. We already talked about Trey Benson. Let's talk about Keon Coleman, a player I was excited about during the NFL season, Scott. And then, after the combine, I've kind of slowed my roll on him a little bit. He's actually fallen quite a bit in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament as far as ADP goes. You're looking at Keon Coleman as wide receiver 59 with a 1308 ADP. That means as far as rookie receivers go, he is the 9th rookie receiver taken. Some of the shine's wearing off Keon Coleman. Why is that? Where do you stand on Keon Coleman?
Well, I do think he's going to get drafted in the top 60 or better picks, probably the top 50 still. So you're fine if you're taking him. I think he's a draftable receiver. I do think he should fall. The 40 times concerning, but the other testing actually wasn't bad for him. And they showed a graphic at the end of the combine. I think most people probably turned it off, but they showed the GPS speeds in the drills, and he was number 2 in the combine. So it's a little bit misleading when you say, okay, he ran a 4.6 240. I was listening to a podcast earlier this week, Balky, and they were talking about guys that actually trained with a lot of these draft prospects. And legitimately, there were guys that came in at the end of the college season, started training for the 40, and they literally shaved 0.2 of a second off their 40 time. So some of this is a margin for error here. Like, how many of these guys truly trained for it? Now, you should train for it.
Yeah.
It's your job interview, right? You don't want to run a 4.6, but there's a level of like, they're training for this drill in a way to kind of cheat the system or fool the system. You know what I mean? It doesn't mean just because you run a 4.6, you're not as fast as a guy that ran a 4.45 when you actually get on the field. And his other drills weren't as bad. So I think he's being punished a little bit. Here's what I'll say, though, for Dynasty. Be careful about Keon Coleman, because you're drafting yourself. If there is another Quentin Johnston in the class, you're drafting yourself into that outcome by taking Keon Coleman. The out you have when you draft him in Dynasty, you hope he's good.
Right.
You hope he's good enough to where other people switch their opinion on him. If he's just adequate, then you're going to go, the only out for him is that he continues to be good. Because there's not going to be people going, oh, I really believe in him. I mean, think of those names and how people treat them. Players people like, they'll give a second chance to. Jamison Williams, they'll give him a third year. Keon Coleman, especially if he goes to one of the landing spots, if he goes to, let's say he goes to Carolina, Balky. All right. The expectation is he's the best receiver on the team from day one.
Correct. Yep.
Oh my God. He can't beat out Adam Thielen or Jonathan Mingo or Terrace Marshall. He's awful. And quickly people will turn on him. He's not good enough. I don't want him. Now you're looking at maybe you can get half of what you paid last year. I don't want to draft myself into that type of asset, regardless of whether I think they're good or not.
That's a good point to consider, too. Now, Keon Coleman, I think it's fair to mention that you will not have to invest the draft capital that you would have had to draft Quentin Johnston last year. However, that doesn't mean that the analogy does not apply as far as if you want to flip this guy later and his perceived value around the league, for sure. We do have a question from Mr. Bakes-A-Lot on YouTube. He wants to know, when we're talking about Malik, Nabers, and Rome Odunze, would we rather have him or either of those two players over a guy you just mentioned, Jamison Williams, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Jayden Reed, or Chris Olave? Scott, your thoughts on that? If we're just putting all these players in a bowl or in a vacuum, I guess, where do Odunze and Nabers rank for you as far as among those 6 receivers?
So I'll go at it from a dynasty lens because I think it's a little more dynamic to do it that way. I'll go Nabers first. That's pretty easy. I would go Chris Olave second. Odunze would be third. Then it's probably JSN, Jayden Reed, a little bit of a tier below. And then Jamison Williams is way below, by far the 6th. He's one of those guys, if you have him, you've had a very luxurious window to continue to sell. Because if you throw him into a cohort and you just say, okay, in the first 18 games of a career, these are the numbers, not even the numbers, these are just the participation on the field. Like the comps to Jamison Williams so far are like, wow, that guy's still in the NFL.
Right.
Yet he's a guy that people are just continuing to fall for again and again. And he's probably an okay NFL player, but I think for Dynasty, that's not type the asset I want. So there's my order.
You have Jackson Smith-Njigba 4th on that list then, if I remember correctly. So he's 4th, and he was a guy who was the number 1 receiver drafted last year. Is there any reason for that? I mean, is it a Metcalf Lockett thing that you have JSN 4th?
I think he is, I don't want to say underwhelming, but just what he did as a rookie, it's just not as impressive as the name value. I think if he didn't have the name value, you would look at him and go, he was like the 6th best rookie receiver. Compare his numbers to Michael Wilson. They're not that different. Yet the perception of JSN is like, okay, if you're having to tell me you need another receiver to get out of the way so he can be good, that's not how receivers work.
That's a good point.
Like you earn the ball if you're out there. And I think we're facing another year where it's not that I don't like JSN. I think he's more of, if you told me his ceiling was Michael Pittman, I would accept that. We already talked about Michael Pittman at the beginning of the show. He's kind of just, he's an innings eater, right? If you have him or Devontae Smith, you're good. You're glad you have him. But I think that's all he is. Yet people still have this name, JSN, man. Just wait. Wait till year 3, Balky, when everybody around him leaves. And then he'll smash, But that's just not how it works. So I just think he is what he is.
I want to talk about a player here that, quite honestly, I haven't made my mind up on yet. I think I'm falling on the fade side of him right now, but my mind, I could be persuaded, as they say. Troy Franklin, a guy who's got the height. I don't necessarily think he's got the frame. He's a little bit of a skinnier guy, but he can burn for sure. And he put up numbers last year too. Where do you personally, Scott Connor, stand on Troy Franklin?
I think he's a richer version of Keon Coleman. I think people liked him a little bit more. I didn't think he bombed the combine as bad. He actually wasn't bad in the combine. He's been getting a lot of flack for the gauntlet drill where he looked like he was all over the place. There's always something that people will nitpick on. I just think he fell a little bit. There were other guys that probably rose up into his tier, but I'd put him somewhere wide receiver 6 to 10, and that's just where he stands. I think he's fine. I want to have some exposure, but I also think we're starting to get into the names where, and I'm coming at this a little bit more from a dynasty perspective, because I think any of these rookie receivers are viable to take with the right roster construction in best ball in redraft. I have no problem with that. But when you're going at it from a dynasty perspective, if I give you a name and then I told you that's Troy Franklin's rookie year, I think immediately you would be like, oh man, I'm not really excited that I have that player on my team. I'll give you an example. If you're in a lineup league where you actually have to set a lineup, when you scroll past Josh Downs on your roster, does that excite you?
No, it depresses me.
And the reality is a lot of the receivers we're going to talk about from here on out, you're like, if I gave you Josh Downs his number, you would go, man, 70 catches as a rookie? That actually is pretty good. But a lot of these guys are going to become the same thing. Yet we're just so excited with them because they're just the new toy. Yet what else can you do with this draft pick that you have? Can you capitalize on the fact before I just take all of these receivers, I don't know which ones are going to be good, but there's a lot of them. And I think there's some outcomes where you get the realistic outcome, but then you're not excited about that a year later where you're going, man, can I trade Josh Downs to get one of these receivers we're about to talk about? And you just keep doing it over and over and over, and they never really make your lineup.
Let me ask you a philosophical question here. Does the fact that you're drafting so many best ball leagues right now, which will include veterans and rookies, help you fight off rookie fever when we get to the rookie drafts later on and at the start of May and so on and so forth? Because I feel like a lot of people, myself included for a while, not so much anymore, but like those are my first drafts of the year. So then I got to fight off rookie fever when I'm doing my managed leagues, my best balls and whatever. But I feel like, drafting this early, it's sort of like the vaccination against rookie fever, right? Because it's harder for it to hit you that hard when we get into May and June.
Oh, 100%. I mean, when I went to Kentucky, I'm the one that I draft almost my entire second half of my roster's rookies.
Mm-hmm.
And it's partially I want to get exposure because I know historically all the rookies as a whole, they're all going to move up as a whole, right? As an aggregate, the entire class is going to move up when you get to June or July. Now, some of them you're going to draft, and it's more dangerous in these best ball tournaments. You draft, I think we drafted Cody Schrader in 5 leagues. There's a chance he's just a 0, right? Like there's some risk that you take on some of these guys and they just become zeros. So that is the risk in non-managed leagues where you're drafting them. They're locked and loaded. But I think in leagues where you're starting to get into lineups, like that's why I love going to Kentucky because it's one of the few tournaments where you can draft lineup leagues with waivers and all that stuff, but you're doing it before there's any of this information. It's pre-combine, it's pre-draft. Heck, the system barely even has the rookies in the system by the time it's ready to draft. So like getting the exposure there, you can cut the ones like Cody Schrader that don't make it. But I think there it does stave off the, man, I have to get all these rookies when everybody has steamed them up after the draft.
I want to go rapid fire on these guys as much as we can. Lad McConkey, Scott, I'm kind of warming up to him right now. I'm starting to feel like this guy could be a high-end number 2 wide receiver at the peak of his powers in the NFL? Is that the way you see it with McConkey as well?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the Josh Downs comparison is apt to me. What if he went to the Colts?
Right.
Would you prefer him over Josh Downs? Like, you have to kind of run that analogy and go, you know what? I don't really know. So I think he's going to be landing spot dependent, but I can also see certain narratives where, you know, what is the jersey you keep seeing Lad McConkey photoshopped in? He just feels like a Ram, doesn't he, Balky?
He didn't until now, but now, yes, I get it. Yeah.
But you could see if they took him, just the Puka comparison, but then also, man, he's the next Cooper Kupp. You know, it's things like that matter in Dynasty. You may have all these receivers similar, but there is going to be narratives and storylines that happen, and you may go, I'm not buying into that. But the thing is, other people are. And all it takes is just something small to happen to where it's Lad McConkey's the next Cooper Kupp. When we interviewed him at the Combine, he compared himself to Cooper Kupp. So we're not just comparing him. Like, he literally said that's the guy he watches. So, I mean, there's going to be narratives, and I just think he's probably somebody that doesn't have a high ceiling, but he could go in a spot where you're more excited for him than some of the guys we've already talked about.
Mr. Bakesalat saying if Ayuk leaves San Francisco, you could see McConkey there. He thinks he could be great with San Francisco if Ayuk is not there anymore. Let's go to Xavier Worthy, who had the Combine buzzing. He sets the record for the fastest 40-yard dash, 4.21 at the Combine. That beat out John Ross's 4.22. Now, here's the thing. This is the importance of not double counting, right? Because we always knew he was a fast guy, so we don't want to double count that, but it kind of reinforced what we thought about Xavier Worthy, and maybe this guy gets up into the first round of the NFL draft. Scott, from a dynasty standpoint, where do you stand on Xavier Worthy?
Well, former Michigan commit Xavier Worthy. I think speaking of his old could have been teammate Roman Wilson, I think he's a poor man's Lad McConkey. And then Xavier Worthy, you know what? I'm kind of warming up to him, and it's not for the reason that you think. I do think that if you're purely drafting in Dynasty and FFPC, and a lot of people play in leagues that are a little bit shallower, the threshold of what you have to hit, we already gave the Josh Downs example, right? Josh Downs, if you got him, that was a successful pick. But you're probably not sitting there thinking, man, that really is going to help my team. In a shallower league, you're kind of going home run or bust. And I do think Worthy's going to be in a role where that's going to be his profile. And I am encouraged by, he was actually the highest in the class in getting like easy, like wide receiver screen targets. Like, he's not just an over the top guy. Like, he's somebody that they'll actually try to scheme the ball to. So I know the Kansas City landing spot, that's the only one where if he goes there, Balky, you're not going to be able to get him unless you're willing to pay wide receiver 4 prices, you know, like that's where you're going to go. Everyone's just going to blow up the narrative. But other than that, I actually am warming up on him a little bit.
I was talking with Shane Hallam a couple of weeks ago on this program about Jaylen Polk, Rome Odunze's collegiate teammate at Washington. And Polk has kind of interjected himself into the conversation for being a receiver that is probably going to be drafted a little bit higher after his 2023 season. Where do you stand on Polk, Scott?
Yeah, we were taking Polk in a lot of our early best ball drafts, just as one of those guys that I do think fits into the he's going to get drafted in the top 70, top 75 picks. And I think once you get past the first round, top 40 or so, all the receivers are very much landing spot, their type of profile, whatever depth chart they land on dependent. So he's one that I'm mixing in, but there's 6 others we haven't talked about that I think are literally in the same tier as Jaylen Polk. So it's pick your poison.
Who else would you throw into that tier? Just briefly, just their names.
I think you have to throw Xavier Legette in there. I think you have to throw, we didn't talk about Adonai Mitchell. Like, I think he's probably top 5, top 6. Devontae Walker, we didn't talk about him. He's another guy that's going to get good draft capital. Ricky Pearsall. You look at Ricky Pearsall and you go, I don't see how he doesn't get drafted in the first 3 rounds. I mean, those ones definitely stand out. Jermaine Burton is another one that was very good in college, or very productive early on in college, but people just forgot about. Jalen McMillan, another one. Devy prospects that didn't come out after their junior year, so people punished them, basically. Like that. Jermaine Burton didn't come out after his junior year, so he must be bad because he went back to school. Meanwhile, we have 23-year-old receivers like Legette that we're celebrating. You know, meanwhile, we're looking at this guy going, man, he had to go back to school. He's not any good. Luke McCaffrey, another one. You know, He's a McCaffrey. Brendan
Right.
Rice. I talked about last night on my show with Ray Garvin. What if Brendan Rice goes to San Fran? There's a narrative, there's a narrative.
Yeah.
Mari Thrash. There's so many of them. Malik Washington. There's so many guys. Javon Baker, Johnny Wilson. There's 25 receivers, Balky, and 15 of them are going to go in the top 3 rounds. It's on you to kind of figure out how you want to play it from a perception standpoint after that.
Yeah, Graphic 13 chiming in, Tez Walker, who I know you mentioned. I like Johnny Wilson, too, probably because of my Florida State fandom. And I know our mutual friend, Farrell Elliott, has been talking my ear off about Jamari Thrash. Like, just cannot stop talking about him whatsoever. Let's wrap up this segment real quick. Jatavian Sanders, the tight end out of Texas. I feel like there's been so much said about Brock Bowers. I don't think there's been a ton said about Jatavian Sanders. Maybe that's because the drop off from Bowers to Sanders is that big. Scott, where do you stand on Jatavian Sanders for Dynasty?
We've been taking him in best ball just because I think he's going to still get pretty good draft capital. With what we talked about at the beginning of the show, I think you do have to take rookie tight ends. I learned my lesson last year. I was always just never take rookie tight ends because it's typically just a bad bet. But we're seeing that start to change. I think for Dynasty, it's kind of hard to justify taking him at the prices of where he's going to cost versus I just read a report today. Noah Fant, Balky.
Yep.
Noah Fant's a guy still. It's only 26 years old, about to hit free agent. That's a guy where you're like, you know what? I'm willing to give him another shot a year after year after year after year. And when you can get somebody like him, you can get 3 Noah Fants for the cost of the Jatavian Sanders pick.
It's true.
So when you put it in that regard, you're like, give me the 3 shots. But again, you probably want to have some exposure. He's going to be tight end too by default.
Yeah, Mr. Bakes a lot. Really likes Jatavian Sanders, especially if he goes to Cincinnati. That Cincinnati tight end spot, that's going to be spicy coming up to see who goes there. We are fast running out of time on the show. Before we get into this last segment where we're going to talk about some Dynasty tips on crafting, constructing, and managing your rosters the best possible way, including free agent running backs on the market. How do you handle those right now? Wide receivers. What's the best way to build a dominant wide receiver room? And I want to talk about Justin Fields a little bit as we get into that as well. He's Scott Connor from Destination Devy and Dynasty Trades in 5. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC. The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show wraps up right after this on the Better Sports Network.
The thing with Dynasty is that it's so hard to get a good league going. It's very difficult to get all these friends that are going to be paying attention or they're going to stick with it and they're not going to say, oh, I don't want to play anymore. My team stinks. Find somebody else next year. And then you're collecting dues and then you're getting in arguments and you're arguing with people on Twitter about dues. We've seen too much of that going on. So it's very difficult. And what happens is you find 5 or 6 good people that want to play and then you don't have enough people and you fill the league with a bunch of weirdos. So what I like doing, honestly, at this stage is if I'm going to play Dynasty, I want to play on a nice, clean, serious, professional site, and I go to FFPC to play, right? FFPC has never had a league fold. Eric Balkman over there told me that. He's like, if somebody has to leave a league, we just fill it. So your option is you can go and do a startup, and like Jack said in the chat, you start it, and then you go and you figure out who you're going to take from the top down. And if you want to do a long rebuild or, a long-term team, or if you want to try and win right away and get a bunch of vets, you can do that. Or you can adopt an orphan team. And with that, you go out and somebody quit and that's so much fun because then you take their team and you have all these guys that you like, but then you have all of these guys that they had that you don't like. And that's actually way more fun because then you can trade all those guys. And it's so much fun to trade. Like when I go to orphan teams, I used to say, I'm not going to take this team because all the players, I don't like them. I only want players I do like. But I've realized that it's actually more fun to take the teams that have a couple guys you really like and a couple guys that everyone else likes that you don't like and then trade them. Like go and grab an orphan team like Gabe Davis and then trade him to some Gabe Davis guy. So go do that now. Use you can use the QR code here or a link in the description, or go to myffpc.com. Just make sure you use promo code COOP when you get set up. They'll give you $25 when you deposit 35 or more. And that's another thing. When you make a league with your friends, Coop isn't giving you $25, right? You have to pay the full dues. This time you get a little discount. So yeah, go over there. And also for you maniacs out there, they do have high stakes leagues. So these leagues, if you want, you can go big time. I know some of the redraft leagues. We announced on this channel a redraft league that 10K buy-in. I'm not sure the dynasty ones go that high, but they go into the thousands. So if you want to take this real seriously and get crazy with it, do it. That's the place to do it. MyFFPC.com, promo code COOP, baby. Go get set up.
The High Stakes Fantasy Football Show rolls on here on the Better Sports Network. We got about 20 minutes left, and I want to tackle a lot of Dynasty. I always call it Dynasty 201 or Dynasty 301 on how to manage your teams properly. Scott Connor from Destination Debbie and the Dynasty Trades in 5 show at Charles Chill FFB on the X Machine. I want to also tell you about the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription. You can get it right now. Unlock all the content for all sports, including annual draft guides. You also get some one-on-one access in expert access in the Discord. You can analyze matchups and trends in your league when you sync up your league with it. Integrated with Fanjections is the lineup generator for the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription as well. Daily rankings, weekly rankings, the value of all position coaches there. Waiver wire ownership percentages, projections, stats, and tools, and more. Build better lineups guaranteed with the Fantasy Alarm All-Pro subscription. Get access to everything Fantasy Alarm offers all year long. Just use promo code LOCK, L-O-C-K, at fantasyalarm.com/lock. That's promo code L-O-C-K. We're getting a lot of positive input, positive feedback from your appearance tonight, Scott. So I want to thank you for that. But as much as it's been fun to talk about individual players, I really think the meat of this show is going to happen right now. I want to kind of pick your brain on the best way to build good rosters in Dynasty. Obviously, pick the best players. It's a simple game, right? No, there's more that goes into it than that. People complain all the time to me. I don't say they complain, but they talk to me all the time about they participate in leagues where there's just not a lot of trading. And I feel like sometimes you got to whet the appetite of your trade partner. Now, there's 2 schools of thought on this. Some people will tell me I like to go like with the 1-for-1 or the 2-for-2 offer and then build up from there to see if we can get something going. And then some other people would say, no, you go with the big offer right away. And then that way you can find out what your trade partner sort of wants to focus on. And then you can figure out, okay, how can I improve my team with what this person's willing to do? Is it better to send small trade offers or craft these large ones in your experience in order to get the best bang for your buck and in order to get more trades done?
Yeah, it's a good question. I do think you have to start regardless of what site you play on, whether it's FFPC or whether it's other formats. You really have to understand the math equation that you're dealing with. Every Dynasty league, I approach any league, but Dynasty just brings in a different component, a market component, a long-term component into it that you don't have in redraft. But any format you play, it's just a math equation. You understand what is the value of roster spots. You understand what is the level of waiver players compared to the back-end players on my team. How close is that? That's going to give you the answer of what type of trades do I need to make. So you got to kind of figure that out first. Like, where is the line of delineation of like where players start to matter and not matter? Like the Josh Downs example. If you're playing an FFPC, you're better off having an open roster spot where Josh Downs sits and turning that over all year and trading him for a second rounder. The second rounder gives you flexibility. You can add to another trade, but the key is you get the roster spot that you can turn over 17 times during the season for a player that was just sitting on your bench and never in your lineup. So thinking about Dynasty like that, I think, is crucial, regardless of the format that you play in. Then it leads to, okay, what is going to work best in my league in terms of getting a deal done? Balky, I play in some really deep best ball Dynasty leagues. Start 13, 40-man rosters. I'll tell you what, there's not a lot of large trade to go down in those leagues because people value pretty much anything that's alive. Right. Any player that can help you, they're overvalued. So in those leagues, you kind of have to think about, okay, if everybody in my league is always going to value the tier down, right? I get 2 players for 1. Like, you're going to want to make those deals. If I know 11 other managers in my league are looking for that, I'm going to try to set my team up where maybe I can be the one team that's actually tearing up because everybody else is looking to go the other way. And you hit on that point perfectly. To get a deal done, there's too much information out there. If we started a league with everybody that's watching right now, there's not an edge in just Bulky and I know more than them.
Right.
There's not. There's not. We're all reading the same content. We're all consuming a lot of the same people's content, people's rankings, people's strategies. There's not an edge in just, I know more than you. Maybe there's an edge with I can find players that I like and you don't like, or vice versa, but that usually takes some work. I do think appealing to another manager, regardless of the type of deal you're making, is there somebody on the other end of this type of trade? And if you can say, yeah, there probably is, that's an angle to explore, because I think once you get one deal done, it leads to good trade relationships. It leads to getting more done down the road. And I think there's extrinsic value if you can pull extrinsic value in a deal. Just like I can do a 2-for-1. What do I get back? I free a roster spot. That's huge. But you may not look at it as a 2-for-1 for me. You don't care that I'm getting one player and you're getting two. You're getting what you want. I'm getting what I want. But I'm also getting something extra because I have a plan to solve that math equation. So that's how I approach Dynasty at its fundamental level before you even get into player takes and is this a fair trade? Is this a bad offer? I think all of those things come into play afterwards.
The Better Boss chiming in on YouTube saying that he likes to start trades small, but most important, try to get the other team better. What better way to tantalize the other team than trying to get them better? And here's the other thing, Scott, and this is maybe Dynasty 101. I don't send comments with my trade offers. I just assume that the person I'm trading with is smart enough to figure out, okay, this is how I'm getting better in this trade. I don't need to tell him, hey, look at what you're getting here. You know what I mean? That's something I gave up a long time ago because it's kind of insulting a little bit to their intelligence.
Do you like comments back?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, because
you get free information, right? You know, okay, maybe this deal didn't work, but how many times have you got a counter trade offer and you know, all right, I got this done. I just got to tweak it. I know I can get this done. And then there's other times the comment is, go away. You need not trading that player ever. And then you're like, okay. So I like sending more offers than I get just because that's the way that I operate. But a lot of times when you get a response, if it gets followed up with an email or a direct message or something, it's free information and you didn't pay for it. All you did was send an offer.
Yeah. And you get information. I love it. I'm going to roll two questions into one here because they're kind of the same thing. The combine is behind us, right? So we kind of know what the numbers are there. Free agency begins on Monday. We know who's out there. We know who's going to be signed or might be signed, whatever. Is there a way that we can capitalize on this particular frame of time that we're in right now after the combine and before free agency? Is there a way that we can cash in on maybe some deals to send to our opposing league mates right now?
Yeah, for sure. I do think a lot of the players we talked about today fall into that range of those picks before the combine were no man's land. People didn't really know what to do with a lot of the picks outside the elite players. And now those seem a lot more viable. I think you have an opportunity if you're holding the 105 or 6 in a single QB, 109 and beyond in a super flex. People actually are, it's not about whether there's good players or not. We knew there was good players in this class. What gets trades done or what gets movement done is demand. There's now demand for those picks. Before it was kind of like, I'll take the picks because I know they're picks. But now it's like I'm starting to put names and faces and you're starting to see, okay, this guy's going to get good draft capital. He was great at the combine. I'm very confident he's going to fall in this 112 to 203 range. I'm comfortable now trading for that pick. And we went through some of the range of outcomes for these guys, Balky. I like Lad McConkey and Roman Wilson, but the odds that they're more than, Jayden Reed and Josh Downs isn't that high. So what else can you do with those picks in this prime season? Or you just wait a couple more weeks and it's just going to continue to build. But I think it's viable to start moving those picks now if you want, or you want to alleviate some of your risk.
What kind of let's talk about it from a super flex draft standpoint, Scott. What kind of value is Justin Fields right now? Is he a guy that you'd be looking to buy because we don't know where he's going to be playing next year? Is he a sell because, quite frankly, he might not be starting anywhere next year? Or is he a hold? How are you treating Justin Fields in your leagues right now?
So it's interesting. There's a site, I'll give it a shout out, Dynasty Daddy, tracks basically the most popular traded players across tons of leagues. And all it is just a list, who shows up on the most transacted players. And Justin Fields is at the top. So I do think that tells me information of, regardless of whether I like or don't like Justin Fields, he is a name I should probably be shopping one way or the other, because I want to make my bet prior to there being news on Fields. And I'll just say this with Fields. I think the next 48 hours to 72 hours is huge for him. Because I don't get the sense that he is a plan A or even a plan B for anybody in the league right now. Right. Meaning he may be sitting on the Bears 2 weeks into free agency, and then it's begrudgingly someone steps in and trades for him, because that's the team that may not be able to trade into the draft and missed out on Russell Wilson or Baker Mayfield or Kirk Cousins, and they go, okay, we'll take Justin Fields. That's totally different than 12 o'clock noon on Monday. Someone has sent a second and a fifth rounder for Justin Fields, and they've picked up his 5th-year option. At that point, you feel good about he's QB 10 in Dynasty, right? You're going to get 2 years of potential top 5 production versus, okay, yeah, the Bears are still struggling to get a third for him on April 2nd. So I think you got to make your bet on Fields right now. If you like him, go buy him. If you don't like him, get out now before 2 weeks from now he's still sitting on the Bears and you're going, I'm not sure if he's going to start this year.
I want to, by the way, great analysis on Fields. What I want to do, because I want to let you breathe on this one. I know you just talked about this, but I want you to tell our audience about it. Constructing a receiver room, wide receiver room. What's the best way that we should try to be, without having pie in the sky, like, oh, I want all my guys studs. Like, there's a way, there's nuance to it. What have you learned in all your years playing Dynasty on the best way to build up your receivers?
All right, so I'm going to give everybody very basic math. So if you can follow this, take your league, and assuming it is not some crazy point per carry or crazy high tight end premium, most leagues operate on around like a 50% flex rate at wide receiver. Meaning if you take the optimal scoring, it's about 50% of the time a receiver is filling the flex. So if you're thinking like best ball, maybe not underdog because it's half PPR and it's a little shallower, but just your typical best ball league, FFPC is perfect. It's about a 50% flex rate at receiver. So here's the math. How many receivers can I start? Give me a number, Balky, 2 or 3. How many can I start?
Well, you could start 4 in the FFPC.
Well, just receiver spots, not flexes. How many receivers are there? Do I have to start 2 or do I have to start 3? Okay,
you have
so
to
I start 2.
Yeah.
How many flexes do I have?
You have 2 flexes.
Okay. So right there's 2 receivers. That's 24 across the league that are guaranteed to be starting, right? Flex rate, 2 flexes, 24 spots because there's 12 teams. Divide that by 50%.
You're looking at
12.
I'm
talking 24 plus 12, 36. I call it the wide receiver threshold. I want to have enough receivers to cover those flexes plus 50%. So I can start up to 4. I want to probably have 6, and the optimal would be having 6 right in that top 36-ish. Now, for Dynasty, that doesn't have to be 6 top 36 Dynasty receivers. One can be Keenan Allen. One can be DeAndre Hopkins, right? Because, short term, they can fill that role, and you figure you just got to backfill them maybe in a year or 2. But the key and the reason why 0RB works is because you get those receivers that fill those thresholds very quickly, and you never have to waste other spots or other roster players to fill in at receiver. So that's how I would roster construct. I don't care if you're starting 3 receivers and 4 flexes, 2 receivers and 3 flexes. Do the calculation. You get the rough idea of where the cutoff is. That's why a guy like Josh Downs in FFPC is kind of he's below that threshold, right? Like he's kind of like a clogger in a way where you like him, but like truly does he crack that top 36? And if he doesn't, you're almost better off re-rolling him to try to get something higher. So that's how I construct. I don't want to waste spots on receiver unless in Dynasty it is a short-term. I know if I draft Brendan Rice, he doesn't fit there, but I can sell him for more than I drafted. But that has to be a short-term solution. That is not I'm holding 3 Brendan Rices all season, so then next year I can sell him. It has to be a very short-term thing. Otherwise, I want to be very efficient at receiver.
And that makes perfect sense, honestly, when you're talking about trying to maximize the value, week-to-week value of the points you're putting up for receivers. That makes a lot of sense, too. Can you apply that to any other positions, like running back, tight end at all?
So I think the key thing, and I'll plug Destination Devy again, we have something called a War Tool, which gives you roster construction analytics. It will tell you those flex rates that I'm talking about. So you get into like FFPC, for instance, is 1.5 tight end premium. The flex rate at tight end is a little bit higher. I'm in some leagues that are 2 PPR for tight end. The flex rates there, the tight ends out to the top 15, 18, they almost pace with the receivers. Like Jake Ferguson is a wide receiver 2 in a 2 PPR league, right? Because he just gets a catch. He gets 70 catches. That's 140 receiver catches. So quickly you can start blending your receiver construction with your wide receiver construction, or your tight end construction with your receiver construction. So you look at it like, all right, I can start up to 4 receivers. I probably need 6, but I also want 2 tight ends. So it's like I need 8 of the combination of the 2. So starting to think about roster construction that way, this really helps you in best ball too, because it gives you a formula to where whether you're right or wrong with the players, if you draft a team, you've seen it playing best ball. There's one team in almost every draft, I can look at their construction and I say they've already lost. They have 4 quarterbacks. Yeah. They only have 3 running backs. Like it's not optimal from a construction standpoint. And I play Dynasty the same way.
Let's do this. Let's wrap up tonight with a free agency talk. Specifically the running backs. I mean, my God, Eckler, Barkley, Pollard, Josh. I mean, like there's so many of them out there. Are you striking the iron on acquiring or dumping any of these guys prior to free agency? And then once they are assigned or announce the signing with the team, is there a proper way to get the best value in trades for them?
Oh man, this is a tough topic because I think you're probably looking at a lot of these guys. You're just lumping into one big group of, if you have a guy like Tony Pollard on Dynasty, do you even really want to trade him? Or does it feel like, man, I might as well just wait and see? Like it's hard to quote unquote buy low on a lot of running backs because I think people see there's a floor. If the opportunity exists, regardless of where they go, they're going to slot in at a certain range. And the buyers are usually trying to go lower than that. I'll just say this. I'm very big on running back efficiency versus volume. So I'm more apt to take shots on somebody like Austin Eckler continually versus a Derrick Henry or a Josh Jacobs. One that I liked, but it sounds like he's going to get cut, Joe Mixon. He's at risk of he could be the next Zeke Elliott where he ends up being usable next year, but he could be Dalvin Cook or Leonard Fournette, Balky, where he gets out there and no one really wants him because he hasn't been efficient at all. So I think you kind of got to look at efficiency and just hope the landing spots are good or bad, or, you pick your bets because there's a lot of names out there and I don't think anybody knows what to do with them other than keep them until I see where they land.
Fine. That was my last question, but we have 2 questions from YouTube right now. John Terry wants to know, Scott, who you think the Chargers are going to sign at running back, or maybe you think they're going to draft somebody. And then Mr. Bakes a lot. I do not have any IDP rookie analysis coming out anytime soon. Do you, Scott?
I do not. I used to be an IDP guy, but dude, it's you think it's tough to go through this and talk about all these players. Triple it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I'll say this, Mr. Bakes a lot, one word in IDP, because I still play in a couple really deep IDP leagues. Stream. Streaming is your friend. Just following who is playing and just chase that and play it that way. Because I do not have the time to look into linebacker rankings and safety rankings and all that kind of stuff. So Chargers, I don't know, man. What do you think? I think I've heard 5 names linked to the Chargers, and I maybe they don't even end up with a veteran running back. They just draft 2 rookies. I don't know.
That's what I would lean towards. I don't know. I mean, I don't think they're going to get a veteran there. I think they take somebody on day 2. I think they take somebody on day 3, and they go to bat with that. They still have who's the cat there last year? The Kelly. They still got Joshua Kelly there, and they still have Spiller, although Spiller hasn't really shown out that much. But like they have options there already. I think 2 rookies is probably the way that they go. That'd be my best guess.
They also have a lot of cap issues. So the idea that they're just going to, they're already in trouble with the cap this year. Are they going to spend it all on Saquon Barkley? You know what I mean? It feels like, you know what I'll say? I'll predict this. I will end it like this. I think there's going to be a veteran running back that goes to the Chargers, and there's going to be a rookie. The rookie could be Corum. It could be everyone puts Corum there because of Harbaugh, right?
Right.
But there's going to be probably a cheap vet. Like that'll be the spot that like Deontay Foreman goes. And it's so cheap. And you're like, damn, like I actually have to take him seriously. And he lands in the spot where everyone wishes Josh Jacobs went.
Right.
Like it's going to be somebody that's cheap that nobody's even paying attention to. And you're going to have to take him seriously. That's my prediction.
We always take Scott Connor seriously. Scott, the best way to keep up with all your goings on and all your content, DestinationDevy.com. Trades and Dynasty. Is it DynastyTradesIn5.com?
DynastyTradesIn5.com, and then YouTube. That's where you can find all the Trades in 5 stuff.
Right. Okay, perfect. Trades in 5 on X, Destination Devy on X, Charles Chill FFB on X. My goodness, what a fun time it was tonight. Always love talking rookies with you, Scott. Thank you so much for hopping aboard, and we will do this again sometime soon. Congratulations on all your success so far in the FFPC and everywhere you're playing, and thanks to you for cranking out all this great analysis for us. We enjoy it.
Yeah, appreciate you having me on, Balky. Anytime during the season, off season, always good to chop it up with you.
Thank you. That is Scott Connor, ladies and gentlemen. Charles Chill, FFB on the X. Want to thank him. Want to thank our producer, Matt Deutsch, tonight. Want to remind everybody, we will be back next Thursday, 7 o'clock until 9 with Dynasty Depot's Nelson Verbit. He's going to join me for the next 2 hours, for those 2 hours. Fantasy Pros Championship, Never Too Early Best Ball Tournaments, the Superflex Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, as well as all those Dynasty Orphans available now at myffpc.com. Thanks so much for watching. For Scott Connor, I'm Eric Balkman. The Best of the Better Sports Network is up next.